Doc on the Run. We help injured runners run.
Today on the Doc on the Run podcast, we're talking about how a runner can tell tenosynovitis from neuritis in the top of the foot. All right, now if you're running and you start getting pain on the top of the foot, it could be lots of different things. And it kind of depends on what happened, what you did, and what it feels like, and then what you do to actually pin down the diagnosis. Now, there are a couple of really common things that I see over and over, and we're just going to talk about those two right now. So this assumes you don't have a stress fracture and that you're convinced you don't have a stress fracture, either because you saw a doctor and they said it's not a stress fracture, or you did some self-diagnosis stuff and you're pretty sure that it's either the tendons or a nerve on the top of your foot. Well, here's the thing. You've got to think about how did it start. Now, the most common way you can get tenosynovitis or neuritis on the top of the foot that seems like tenosynovitis is that you're running and you've over-tightened the laces on the top of your shoes. I did that myself one time. I was doing the Salt Lake City Marathon. I was training heavily. I wanted to PR, and I was real nervous. So at the start of the race, I was tightening my shoelaces, and I was standing around. It felt a little loose, so I basically tightened them again, and then I felt like they were too tight, so I loosened them. And I did this 3 or 4 times, and I was literally still fiddling with my laces when the gun went off. And so I just cranked them down and took off. And about 8 miles in, I realized that my left foot, every time it hit the ground, I started to feel it. And I knew that it hurt, but I was on pace, so I was not going to stop then. And I went all the way until about mile 23 or so before I actually had to walk for a little bit because it hurt so bad. Now, unfortunately, that, of course, is still 3 miles from the finish. It was where it was flat, and it was completely demoralizing because I should have been able to just cruise all the way into town to the finish line and get my PR, and instead I completely destroyed it and blew it entirely by having to walk quite a bit because my foot hurt so much. Now, that was tenosynovitis, and that was just inflammation of the sheath around the tendons on the top of my foot. Now, the thing is, if you get that as your problem because you over-tighten the laces, if you ice it, it'll feel a lot better pretty quickly. If you do something like the contrast bath routine where you really flush out that inflammation and stop that inflammatory response, it'll feel a whole lot better. If you're moving your toes a lot and it hurts, that also suggests it's tenosynovitis. But neuritis is a little bit different. So with neuritis, it might feel better while you're icing it, but the nerves really don't calm down that quickly just from doing something like the contrast bath routine or from icing. So if you've applied ice and it feels better while you're doing it, but it really doesn't make much change, it might be neuritis. Also, the way it feels tells you a whole lot about which of those two things it might be. So if it's a musculoskeletal thing like a tendon sheath or a tendon injury that's really inflamed, well, in that case, those musculoskeletal things respond well to treating the inflammatory process, getting rid of the inflammation, and they start to improve pretty quickly. Nerve things tend to linger. The nerves kind of get aggravated and they very slowly improve. So if you have slow improvement, more likely to be a nerve, as long as you're actually treating the inflammation part. Also, if it's tingling, burning, radiating, if it really sort of kind of shoots up your foot toward your ankle or out toward your toes, way more likely to be a nerve issue. The musculoskeletal things usually hurt in one spot, and when you push in it in that spot, it just hurts right where you're pushing. So that's the first thing. Now, all these things really point to one or the other, whether it's a nerve injury or tenosynovitis, but the tendons on the top of the foot have a nerve really close to them, and the tight laces, over-tightening your cycling shoes, particularly those really the ones you crank down with a wire, they can really apply a lot of tension on the top of the foot that compresses the nerve and causes neuritis. They can also compress the tendons and cause tenosynovitis. So either of those can easily happen. Now, if you tried a bunch of stuff, kind of poking around yourself and thinking about what it really feels like, thinking about how it started, you've altered the lacing pattern to take pressure off that area, and you're still thinking, well, maybe it's a nerve thing because it just doesn't seem to be getting better very quickly. One thing you can do is you can take lidocaine patches that you can get over the counter, and you basically cut it into some small squares. You look at your foot, you know where the nerve goes. It's very easy to find actually, and usually it's around that same spot, but on the top of the foot, it's this one nerve called the intermediate dorsal cutaneous nerve that kind of causes pain on the top outside of your foot, or the deep perineal nerve that happens to cause pain on the inside of your foot. And so you look at those spots and figure out where the pain is, and then you put one of those patches over there and leave it on for 12 hours during the day, take it off at night, and then see how quickly it responds. Because one of the treatments for neuritis is for a doctor to actually inject it with local anesthetic to make it numb to see if it kind of quiets the nerve. Well, if you put lidoderm patches or lidocaine patches, any patches that have local anesthetic properties in it on the top of the foot, and that nerve's right under the skin, Well, if it quiets the nerve and you start to improve very quickly, then you know it's neuritis and not tenosynovitis. Because if you put the patch on and you still move your toes and it really hurts, well, that's more likely to be a tendon issue because you're moving the tendons and it's causing pain. Those are also deeper structures and they don't get numb or you don't get relief as quickly from those kind of dermal patches that have local anesthetic in them. So that's one of the ways that you can tell the difference between neuritis and tenosynovitis on the top of the foot when you're a runner.
Doc on the Run. We help injured runners run.